I just want to say a quick thank you to Meister Selig and Fine, whose office this is, and to my husband Dave Ross, who has been so instrumental in putting this together. This is where he works if you want to go trash his office. It's just right down there.
More than it already is, yeah.
I want to thank Nicole Verdi and Alicia Buckingham and Mercedes Medina and so many others, Naomi, who helped put this together. And I also want to thank the amazing people who just made remarks, because I have to say these are all people I'm completely and utterly starstruck by. Just people that I look up to and respect so much. And Carlene Bauer has this amazing article in Elle for April. Go pick up Elle for April, because an amazing article about single women in the U.S. Hey, come on in now. Professor Chung blew my mind for an entire semester. She's responsible. You're responsible for this. So I just really want to say thank you so much. I just wanted to, for a few minutes, talk about why I wrote the book, and then I'm going to read a little bit from the book. So in my last semester of seminary, which was in 2011, I found myself at a Barnes & Noble, the one I think on like 86th and on the west side somewhere. And I was there in the Christian inspiration section because I was having a really tough time. I had just broken off an engagement with somebody who lived in another state, and all my possessions were in Alabama with him. That was not good. I was going into my process of exams, trying to graduate from seminary. I had decided not to move away, to get married and move. I was going to stay in New York, so I was desperately looking for a job, which Nick Stewart gave me. Thank you, Nick, at Odyssey Networks. And looking for a place to live, and there was just so much happening. And I thought, for the first time in a long time, I really want a devotional book for women. I want to see how my faith can speak to me right now. So I go to Barnes & Noble's, and I'm sitting in my snow boots, because it was spring, it was snowing, on that gross green carpet that they have, and flipping, looking through all the women's Christian devotional books. And every single one, I was like, oh, I can't believe it says that. They were all about purity and piety and obedience and patience, like awful, like patience, and all these things that Christianity typically says to women. But I had been at Union for 3 years, and I could not stomach any of it. However, I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, as a fundamentalist conservative evangelical. And so all this language that was being used in these books was what I had known for 37 years. And suddenly I just could not even look at it anymore. And I walked home that night, through the grimy, nasty New York snow, thinking, wow, I'm completely empty-handed. I just went to look for something to really encourage my faith, and I couldn't find anything. So hence, I decided to write this book for all the women who are looking for something to empower them and want to go to their faith for that, and they can't find it anywhere. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is that Pew and Barna studies are showing that women are leaving faith and religion in droves. They're leaving churches because it just doesn't address their real lives anymore. We're out there pounding the pavement. We're trying to establish careers. We're trying to reach our dreams. And a lot of the very male-dominant, and no offense to guys at all, we love you, but all of the male-dominant language and imagery of God and symbolism, it just doesn't speak to us where we really are. So the interesting thing, though, that hit me about these Pew and Barna studies, though, was that all these women were like, oh, I'm not reading the Bible anymore, I'm not going to church anymore, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing that. But 2/3 of them said that their faith was still really important to them. And even though, I think that this is something for people of every faith or no faith, there was something about the gospel of Jesus that people didn't want to part with somehow. And I think it was really just that redemptive resurrection idea that Jesus represents for anybody. You don't have to be Christian. You don't even have to be a religious person at all. But just that idea that somebody can fight for what they believe in and be put to death and come back and inspire so many people to fight. So a lot of people ask what the title Femmevangelical means. And the femme, kind of obviously, part of that is feminist. I was raised to believe feminism was a dirty word. I was told all while growing up, these are immoral women who are just upset about nothing, And there was just this really bad reputation for anyone feminist. And, even today, there's so much debate in the media. There's a lot going on with celebrities and politicians and all kinds of people talking about the word. And really, all it means is that women and men are equal. It's not male bashing. It's very positive word, feminism, and I really want to restore that positivity to it. It's about making a better world for all of us, children, men, women, people of all faiths and no faiths. And so I really wanted to evoke feminists of faith to come back and sort of recapture that word. But femme also refers to turning on its head that whole notion of the femme fatale. Our cultural stories about women often are about these cunning women who use their sexuality to take down a man and get what she wants. That's all throughout our film and our art and culture. And
that's not that bad.
Yeah, it's not that bad. But the problem with it being, it's good in some ways, bad. The problem is when Augustine says that about Eve, and henceforth all the women, Eve is the mother of all women, being a femme fatale who was a seductress and a temptress and weak and evil and, caused the fall of man. And Augustine affected so much of we see it in our American culture every day, even though we're a secular, technically, country. We see so many ideas about women as untrustworthy. They can't make decisions about their own bodies. They can't, there's a woman in Texas who's a CEO of her own company who was in the media the past couple days saying Hillary Clinton shouldn't be running for president because God only means for a good, strong man to be in that position. There's women starting to come out. We just saw a gang rape on the beaches of Panama City, where I grew up going to the beach. Hundreds of people standing around doing nothing in broad daylight. And what are the people in the media saying? They're saying that girl drank too much. They're not saying, why do these young men think they have a right to her body in public, in broad daylight, to gang rape her? We saw the Vanderbilt athletes who thankfully got convicted after raping and urinating on a young girl and videotaping it on their phones. Thank God they took video, because that was what convicted them. But otherwise, women aren't believed when they tell that story later. A woman in Iowa just got arrested because she fell down the stairs while pregnant. And there's actually a new law passed there and in many other states that says she could be arrested and imprisoned and charged with attempted fetal homicide. She was arrested after that. In Louisiana, a woman went to the hospital with unexplained bleeding that turned out to be a miscarriage. She spent over a year in jail on charges of second-degree murder. Politicians want to shut down Planned Parenthood, thinking it's all about abortion. But for women in poverty, it's the only way to get a life-saving mammogram or pap smear. Life or death for women. And women are, the gender that's in the most poverty, especially single mothers trying to raise children. So, I wrote this book because I feel like, well, no, I don't feel like, I know that a lot of our American culture in politics, economics, social, education, business, it all goes back to this idea underlying our culture of religious belief that woman was made for man, and that God made woman secondary. And so I just really am hoping to unpack that, especially for young women, in this book, and talk about how our faith informs every part of our lives. It's not this separate thing that we do privately in person. It affects all of our beliefs and our entire worldview, and that for women, but also the LGBTQ community and anyone else who is marginalized in religion. Obviously we've been fighting the Religious Freedom Bill in several states right now that wants to oppress people because of who they are, because they think it's their religious right. So that's what I'm hoping, and I just wanted to read a couple little excerpts. Rosemary Radford Ruether, a feminist theologian, said it really well about why women are starting to move away from religion. She said, religious traditions fall into crisis when the received interpretations of the redemptive paradigms contradict experience in significant ways. So in other words, the justice, blessing, and deliverance that were promised by traditional religion is not actually happening for women. We move on because the church's formula of religious revelation, who we are, what we should believe, and how we should behave, does not address our real daily lives and needs. And its kind of redemption does not make us feel redeemed. It makes us feel anything but. So with that in mind, this is a portion called Truly Seek God, talking about how women can, instead of just doing whatever we're told or believing whatever we're told about God, how do we start a process of saying, that God defined for me, I don't believe that exists anymore. And a lot of times then you're sort of left with this gaping hole, like, how do I pray? Am I going to read the Bible? What do I do for my spirituality now? So this is a part of that. For many of us, God was initially taught and defined rather than encountered and experienced, or perhaps vice versa. As young children, we encountered and experienced God, but the God who was taught to us and defined for us quickly took over. Do you long to just be with God and be allowed to accept and explore the God that you find in that intimacy, whatever it turns out to be? Do you want to be able to pray without feeling forced to beckon that feudal Lord who waits impatiently in the clouds for us to come bow before a throne? Do you want to be done with the God who is all pomp and power structures? Because of the way God has been traditionally presented in Christianity, making room in our heads and hearts for another reality is something we must really learn how to do. The human mind is built with a powerful ability to create its own sense of reality within which to operate. Scientific research shows that our brains are responsible for not just deciphering, but creating the world around us. We establish our own views and narratives to explain our surroundings and give them meaning. Or, as is often the case, our society or religion has already established the narratives to explain our existence and the phenomena that occur in the world. We just assume it's correct and we fit ourselves into it. But this can get tricky as we learn, grow, and change. The transformation of sense experience into perceptions will draw on prior beliefs. We have an overwhelming propensity to perceive what we already expect to perceive, writes Dr. Raymond Tallis in Oxford Journal's Brain, a Journal of Neurology. But there's a pretty good reason that we're made this way, actually. Associative learning, the conditioning of reflexes and the like, enables us to discover which of our actions influence the future and indeed to predict our reward. Associative learning enables the brain to construct a map of the world. This is essentially a map of value, which intimately ties our bodies to the world around us so that we can respond in the quick and efficient way that's essential for our survival. But the danger is that too often we stay in autopilot mode, ignoring new information while replicating detrimental patterns of survivalist living. We easily get stuck in backward behavior and self-sabotaging beliefs. As much as our tendency to replicate patterns has been misused by world leaders and religious powers over time to subdue people and maintain the status quo, there actually is a flip side. We can reclaim and utilize this knowledge to shift our perceptions and create a new reality for ourselves, as Jesus suggested: freedom for prisoners, sight for the blind, liberation for the oppressed, and the eternal jubilee. Our map of value can transcend old world survival instincts and defense mechanisms and discover new rewards for seemingly counterintuitive behavior that takes society to the next level. Instead of being self-centered, we become community-oriented. Instead of being concerned for only our own benefit and those just like us, we become empathic and thoughtful toward those who are different. Instead of dog eat dog, we give each other a hand up and a place at the table. But this all hinges on the language we use, the stories we tell ourselves, our understanding of our place in the world, and our perception of what is real. It requires us to stretch and even break our conditioned responses and assumptions. This is what Jesus did. His presence and proclamations about God's coming realm were constantly stretching the human neurological tendencies to help people sense this realm of God that he talked about and see it as good. He told bizarre parables that seemed to describe an alternate universe so counter to society's standards and so unintelligible to trained brains that many could not understand the points of Jesus' parables. He performed miracles of transformation and healing that make us question how reality truly works. He demonstrated that humanity did not have to be stuck with the way things are. He brought stories to life using vividly strange language and images to help people begin to imagine and practice a different way of being. Biblical interpretation, Christian doctrine, and religious hierarchy have gotten in the way of Jesus' mission and our understanding of it. For centuries, the powers and authorities have been telling us that if we dare to use our free will and let our imaginations run wild, we will inevitably screw things up and get punished by God. If we step outside the boundaries, respond to new discoveries, or see things differently, we will be eternally damned. This has halted the realm of God. It is not what Jesus described as the way. In the book Lean In, Women Work and the Will to Lead, Sheryl Sandberg asks what we would do if we were not afraid. We must ask ourselves what we would believe and what actions we would take if God, or people speaking for God, would not send us to hell. What would you say out loud, and what kind of woman would you be if you weren't wary of lightning bolts, disparaging remarks, or retaliation? If you were not afraid to truly seek, what God would you find? And part of that harkens back to, I failed to tell you the evangelical part of the title. Of course, I was raised, with a very fundamentalist view of evangelicalism, and it means all these things, and it's very complicated and, damning and scary, and it leaves most people out. But when I was studying and went back to the core of the gospel, and I know my fellow union folks will say amen to this, you realize that the gospel of Jesus was really the evangel, meaning the good news, or a reward for bringing good news. The evangel of evangelicalism was really when Jesus, who was a very oppressed first century Palestinian Jew under a very violent Roman occupation, stood up in this tiny little temple in his hometown and asked for the scroll of Isaiah and read from it and said, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me. I'm going to release the prisoners. I'm going to free the captives. I'm going to restore sight to the blind. I'm going to establish the year of the Lord's favor," which in his context and time meant the Jubilee, which meant that slaves or anybody else who was indebted to anyone were released. They were just released, and they could go home, and they could go back to their family and be restored to their community and take their rightful place without having to do anything. And Jesus, this is what Jesus said. This was his good news. And it was centuries later, when it became an imperial state religion of the Roman Empire, that all these rules and controls and damnation and everything got added on to that. So, my desire with this book is to reclaim that that sense of evangelicalism. The good news is that you're free and that you can be who you are. So just one more little part here, and then you won't have to stand. Jesus admonished his followers to break loyalty to overbearing systems, to pursue healing and wholeness as part of what he called the realm of God. Entering a new realm of dignity and potential requires leaving the status quo comfort zone behind. Theologian Elizabeth Schussler Fiorenza exhorts us, as a feminist vision, the basileia, which is Greek for kingdom or realm or rule, the basileia vision of Jesus calls all women without exception to wholeness and selfhood. We are called to work toward this way of being, but unfortunately, the powerful old structures of our society and religion make it quite a challenge sometimes. In his Escape from Freedom, Erich Fromm talks about the fear that autonomy and choice feel like a daunting burden. He writes in 1941 about the history of European social conditions between the Middle Ages and the 20th century, conditions that actually eventually paved the way for the rise of the Nazi Party in Germany. So Fromm explores from a psychological perspective why the German people supported Hitler's totalitarian regime. He cites the alienation amidst social and economic change that was prevalent among the masses, who had graduated very slowly over a few generations from the strict overlording of Roman Catholicism to the ripples of the Reformation. People were now allowed to worship God directly, but the doctrines of Luther and Calvin were teaching them that humanity, being intrinsically corrupt and depraved, must work to receive salvation from a vindictive, punishing God. The working classes had also begun to enjoy direct employment by capital holders, but as a consequence were losing familial and personal ties to vocations and their intimate personal roles and healthy community interdependency. With the spread of capitalism that sprouted from the Protestant Reformation, life was quickly becoming every man for himself. The resulting isolation, Fromm assessed, left a gap for Hitler to exploit. The ongoing uncertainty and struggle of managing newfound freedoms, no matter how modest they were. Hitler and his regime presented a way for people to escape the pressures of steep learning curves and the risk of failure by depending upon and submitting to a strong leader who promised to march their society to glory and victory over the competitors looming in a shrinking globe. Okay, so we live in a very different environment today, but for women who are undergoing their first experience of isolation from the rewards and the protections of being good girls for the patriarchy, there's a disorientation, and it can be a threat. When we leave this old religious belief structure that we've been inculcated with behind, we enter a free fall. We're suddenly dependent on no one but ourselves, yet we have not been taught how to fight for ourselves, believe in our female abilities, trust our instincts and decisions, appreciate and love our own bodies, and demand respect. This leaves an opportunity for maleficent forces to convince us we need and want the wrong kind of victories, assisted by the wrong kind of heroes. It makes getting rescued by Prince Charming seem like the best option. As Sue Monk Kidd has said, when a woman starts to disentangle herself from patriarchy, ultimately she is abandoned to her own self, and it can be scary and lonely. It was a golden lit October afternoon, exactly 1 month to the day after the strange meeting with the future-telling fashionista in the Chelsea nail salon. I was running late for a table reading of a play I was in, and I hustled up the sidewalk, weaving my way through the crowds. I had to stop and pick up an allergy medicine, or else I would sneeze through the rehearsal. I was very focused on my mission and cleared a row of pumpkins with a little leap in order to shortcut to the drugstore's front door. Exiting at the same time was a petite ponytailed young mother laden with shopping bags, pushing her crying baby in a stroller, and clutching the hand of her small, wriggly toddler. She was distracted managing her brood, and I swerved around her to avoid plowing into her. I took maybe 3 more steps before I heard a voice cry, "Miss!" It sounded urgent, like somebody collapsing beneath babies and bags. "Miss, please." I turned around and our eyes locked. She didn't seem to care that our little boy was pulling violently at her arm or that her toiletries were spilling onto the sidewalk. We stood just inside the store's entranceway, the electronic doors jumping robotically as we held the laser movement detector hostage. The setting sun streamed in brightly from behind her, and I had to push my sunglasses onto my head to see her face. "This is going to sound strange," she said in a calm, hushed voice, "but I need to tell you something." With both arms in danger of being pulled out of socket, holding the stroller and the spinning toddler behind her, she went on to recite a shorter version of the same speech the woman in the nail salon had delivered. "You've been silenced by suppositions. You're on a difficult journey. You must find your voice because there's something that needs to be said. You must pay attention and come to know and trust yourself. You have to be brave. It matters." Agitated and confused, and still in a very big hurry, I pushed my sunglasses down into my nose and mumbled, "I am in a serious rush." Embarrassed at my own rudeness, I turned and made haste toward the pharmacy in the back. The nice Southern girl was starting to get frustrated and defensive. "I'm not trying to scare you," her voice trailed after me, as if she could see right through me. "I just could not leave this store without saying what God asked me to. I wish you well." "God again? Really? What the hell?" I did not look back. But exactly 1 month later, after Thanksgiving dinner, I peered skeptically into an idling cab, opened the door, and unwittingly slid into what felt like an alternate reality. And I ended up in free fall on my foyer floor. All these years later, I look back and wonder what would have happened if I had not been afraid. What would I have done differently then if I had believed what those strange messengers said about me? What would you be capable of doing if you could clearly see and believe the truth about yourself and feel supported by the universe and your purpose? What if women were not split in two, our being from our believing? At that point, I would not have recognized a God who would encourage my authentic voice or allow me to honestly vocalize everything I had ever experienced. I did not know anything about a God who would want me to recognize I had divine Sophia wisdom inside me. I had not yet detected, as Paul Tillich would say, the God above theism. The romantic longing for fate to swoop in and commence our happily ever after is really a convenient way for us to evade the pain of making strange new choices, hard calls, scary changes, and questionable left turns. But the only other option is facing the isolation and disorientation that comes with setting aside fairy tales and Bible stories as maps to our futures and forging our own path, led by the voice of God that's within us. As Sue Monk Kidd says, there is no place so awake and alive as the edge of becoming. But more than that, birthing the kind of woman who can authentically say, my soul is my own, and then embody it in her life, her spirituality, and her community is worth the risk and hardship. The edge of becoming. This is where we feel most alive, find authentic purpose, and push ourselves to the next level of hope, bravery, and action. We know we are onto something when, every day, being is a process of constant becoming. So how do we ignite a faith practice in which our being and becoming is the expression and manifestation of our real belief? The key, perhaps, surprisingly, lies in our frustrations. And I don't mean your feelings when your significant other leaves dirty socks on the floor or your mother criticizes your outfit. I mean frustrations about the way the world operates. Carter Hayward, feminist theologian and lesbian Episcopal priest, was one of the Philadelphia 11, the 11 original women whose ordinations made it possible for women to be recognized as priests in the Episcopal Church in 1976. My favorite piece of advice Hayward offers is this: let your frustration guide you. It will lead you to your life's purpose, and it will benefit a lot of people and change the status quo along the way.